Before we get started, we have to talk about the history of this pad. Bear in mind that almost everything we know about Namco cabs comes from this random forum post. Assuming we can trust Anime Super J, who is apparently a well-known member of the Arcade Museum forums, here's the story. Namco wanted to add DDR to a bunch of their arcades. They went to buy a lot of cabinets and were supposedly the victim of a bait and switch. They were shown a real cab, and when the cabs were delivered, they got something totally different. Unofficially, it's speculated that somebody at Namco bought these without really looking at them. When Namco got the cabs, there were two big problems. Number one, they sucked. They were just poorly built, sort of slapped together, and they barely functioned. I'll talk more on the construction of the pad later, but supposedly Namco had their technicians fix up the pads and put real arcade sensors in them, though mine doesn't seem to have been so fortunate. The second problem, which doesn't really matter to me but was a big deal for Namco, was that these cabs were running hacked PS2s and home copies of DDR Extreme, which is illegal. Apparently Namco solved this by putting ITG box stores in the cabs. It's just crazy to me how little is known about these cabinets. I wonder if there are any of them still out there today running ITG or even a hacked PS2. Anyway, back to the construction. I really had no idea what to expect when I bought this cab, but it was $100, so I had to at least find out. Here's the video I took when I first got the pad home. Okay, so I've just acquired the Namco Crapo-Pad. I took all the brackets off of the down arrow, which are just like wood screws that go into wood. And this is what the step looks like. I could forgive the dirtiness. So there's one panel, and then there's another panel. And then under this, here's the situation. This is just like a button, like an arcade button, with a hand-routed arrow recess and some lights poking up through. There's a nail. I don't know why that's there, what that's from. The thing is disgusting. Okay, I just had to pause here because do you see this tape residue here that I've circled? I would later find out that there used to be metal contact sensors that would actually control the game, and that the button in the middle was just for lights. Meaning that these were totally decoupled. You could press one without pressing the other, making the lights basically useless. Anyway, I then took to disassembling it, which was a bit of a trip because the screws were all rusted and, it's all like old rotten wood, and it was pretty nasty. I had to grind a couple of the screws off. Once I had it taken apart, it became apparent just how crappy the Crapo-Pad really is. You can see here it's just like two pieces of plywood slapped together with some buttons and some metal contact sensors in there. Also, the wood was totally rotten and it smelled terrible, so I had to throw it out immediately. But underneath all of that crappy, nasty, rotten wood is a steel frame that's welded together and a bar that attaches on pretty solidly. So what we have here is a decent base for making a pad. The build section of this video is going to be more of like a montage rather than a step-by-step, partly because filming is annoying and I didn't capture everything, and also partly because, I don't know, I just don't think it's all that interesting to watch every step of me building this thing. The general construction is actually not that different from the original Crapo-Pad, except that instead of disgusting plywood, I'm using new melamine. Mounting the steps and the panels directly to the box tubing was going to be super annoying. I don't really know how to work with metal, but also the square holes that are made by this box tubing aren't actually square. I mean, you can see the down arrow one is like a huge rectangle, so this allows me to actually line everything up where it should go. I didn't aim the camera at myself for me doing this, but I had to use our rubber mallet to get the bar in. I'm happy that it's tight because that means that it won't wobble around while I'm playing, but it's also a pain to get in and out. Next, I screwed in all the side metal pieces, including little melamine risers to get them up to the right height. By the way, how cool is this shop that I'm working in? This is not my house or my shop. This is the Southside Hackerspace in Chicago. Of course, I also want to have lights in this pad, so now I need to cut out holes for the lights to shine through in each step. I probably should have done this before I assembled everything, but I'm dumb. And the jigsaw worked just fine. That 90-second build montage represents a full day of work, after which I was pretty tired, so I headed home. Luckily, I got everything that I needed the hackerspace for done, so the next day I could just work at my house and not have to cart the pad back and forth. I started the next day by attaching these 3D printed brackets. These are actually the same ones I use on my travel pads, and you can see here they have holes for the wires to go through, which makes routing them pretty easy. They're really skinny, making screw holes annoying, so I'm just attaching them with epoxy. The outer brackets, however, do have screw holes. Next, I started working on the electronics, starting with soldering up a teensy to one of these PCBs that the Pads channel and Stamina Nation helped me design. This is actually an older version, and development of these is still sort of ongoing, but I had a bunch of these laying around, so I ended up using this one. While I soldered wires to the FSRs, Marissa cleaned off all the metal panels. These are pretty nasty because they're original to the Crapo-Pad. Then I laid down some Velcro for the FSRs to attach to. And I put the corresponding Velcro onto the FSRs. I covered them up with white gaff tape, mostly just because the panels are transparent, and I didn't want the FSR to show through. The PCB that I soldered the teensy to has mounting holes, so I screwed it into the bottom, and then routed all the FSRs around and plugged them all in. Then it came time to mount the lights. Actually, mounting the lights is the easy part because they're adhesive backed, but soldering them, connecting them together is a pain because there's 3 tiny little solder pads on each strip that I had to connect together, and I'm not the best at working on really small things, so this took a while, and I ended up frying a few of the solder pads, but eventually I got it all working. For the down arrow hole that's way bigger, I 3D printed these little brackets to stick the lights to. Then I chamfered the top of all the steps. These are polycarb panels that I bought from Tap Plastics and then cut the corners off on a bandsaw. This cheap old router works great, but it does shoot polycarb dust everywhere. Gives a nice finish though. I mounted all the steps by basically just placing it down and then eyeballing a hole that will go through the outer bracket. Then I put a threaded insert into the melamine so that I can take the step in and out without worrying about destroying the melamine. Then I countersunk the holes in the steps and threaded a screw through into that threaded insert. I did also countersink the screw holes in the metal panels, so everything's flush. The software that I'm running here is the same software that runs on my travel pads, but I modified it to have light support, which I'll put up on a branch on GitHub. Getting the lights to work was difficult because I guess Teensy and Fast LED don't play nice like Arduinos do, which I didn't know, so I just kept trying to make Fast LED work. But eventually I did get it working and it looks nice. I added window film to make the steps more translucent and diffuse the light, and I also 3D printed these little feet for the leg levelers so that they don't scratch up my floor any more than they already have. That's about it. Now I have to get back into playing ITG after taking a few months off. A couple of shout outs. I have to shout out Marissa, the person you see helping me throughout this video. Shout out to the Southside Hackerspace. It's a great workshop. I definitely wouldn't have been able to do this project without it. Shout out to Dominic, who pressured me to make a video about this. And shout out to the Stamina Nation Discord, especially the Pads channel. I'm always hanging out in there, just talking about building pads, giving advice, getting advice. It's a great spot to hang out. But yeah, that's it. That's the video. Bye-bye.